One of the ones that people walk into more often than they would expect, and this is kind of sad, to be honest with you, as a prosecutor to see, is embezzlement. Like, I indicted a lot of people for it. I've done a lot of research on it. I've lectured on it. Sure, I mean, it is the kind of crime that I expect I will commit at some point.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Boston Barristers. This is episode 2. I'm Matthew Peterson, and here with my colleague Chris O'Brien, the newest attorney at the law office of Matthew W. Peterson. We're both practicing here in Massachusetts, and today we're diving into something that affects more people than you think: white-collar crime. If you're tuning in from Boston or anywhere else across the Commonwealth, this one's for you. Chris, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me on, Matthew. Happy to be here.
So let's start simple. What is white-collar crime, Chris?
White-collar crime? It's probably an objectionable term, but generally money crime that's not a smash and grab theft is probably the best way to describe it. Larceny, embezzlement, larceny by false pretenses, fiduciary embezzlement, money laundering, you name it. If it has to do with money or fraud, but people commit fraud to get money. So it's going to be one of those two.
You prosecuted these crimes for what, 3 or 4 years at the AG's office in Massachusetts?
Yeah, 3-ish years at the AG's office, and I was something of a go-to for white collar when I was an assistant county attorney in Rockingham County, New Hampshire, because I was a tax attorney for a bunch of years before I became a prosecutor. So yeah, I mean, I only mentioned that because I had a jury trial for at least one white collar case up in New Hampshire, and then I prosecuted for the AG's office down here for the last 3 years.
So yeah, we're both wearing our white collars, so this kind of fits, right?
Sure. I mean, it is the kind of crime that I expect I will commit at some point.
Well, hey, you're a criminal defense attorney, not a criminal attorney, man.
That's fair. Also, it makes me think of that book you tell me about where everyone commits 3 felonies a day. White collar is probably one of the ones that people commit all the time without knowing it. And if you don't know it, it's not really a crime. So
what kind of offenses fall under the white collar crime umbrella?
So again, I mean, feel like fraud's a pretty big one. One of the ones that people walk into more often than they would expect, and this is kind of sad, to be honest with you, as a prosecutor to see, is embezzlement. So someone has money they didn't take it from anybody. It was given to them, and it was given to them with good reason. So you are lawfully in possession of this money, and you have a bad week or 2 or 5, and now you can't make payroll for your business. So you take some of that money and you use it in your operating expenses or to pay for your mortgage or your car. And now you're in a position where you're robbing Peter to pay Paul because you took some money from the first person to pay your bills, and now you're chasing that, and they just daisy chains. And so it's a sad situation because people can get into that when they think, I'm only borrowing this money. And that is not the law. The law, at the point of conversion, once that money is now out of your hands, once you spent it, you are guilty. And if it's over $1,200, of felony embezzlement. So that's one example. But like I said, fraud, money laundering, larceny, more generically, can fall under the white collar crime umbrella. Government services fraud.
So is the main difference between white collar crime and street crime the violent aspect of it, or what? How would you describe it as being different from?
Yeah, it's probably worth pointing out that there's no. I mean, if there is a generally accepted definition for it, I'm not sure what it is. There certainly is no legal definition for it in terms of like white collar crime goes through this part of the justice system and whatever else we're going to call street crime, non-white collar crime is going to go through a different part of the justice system. So these are very informal terms. You know, the difference is, I think you pretty much have it. There's usually a violent aspect, which is why I said that even if it's larceny because somebody stole something, if it's a smash and grab, like you go into a jewelry store and you take the jewels out of the whatever, or if you just rob a package store, you take the cash out of the cash register. That's going to be robbery. Really, it's like, there may be an adjunct larceny charge or may not be, I guess, depending on some of the facts. But, when it's visceral, when it's when it's in person, it's not generally going to be considered a white collar crime. Whereas white collar crime is like you're in business and you're doing stuff illegally. right? It's just a function of your business because you're in a position where you can commit these crimes, so you do.
Yeah, so it's more like financial crimes and more like moving money around and money that you're not supposed to. Is that right?
Skimming. Yeah, skimming. Like if you can, think that if somebody has access, another embezzlement that I saw, more than once is you take a little bit off the top and hope nobody notices. It's just the operating fund is a little bit lower than it's supposed to be. That could be one of the ways. And it can be tempting, right? If somebody thinks, I'm not getting paid enough for what I'm doing and no one's watching me and I have access to all this money, like maybe I deserve to have something extra, make sure I don't have to sweat coming, paying my mortgage. So, because I think a lot of people wouldn't spend the money if it wasn't already in their possession. That's why I think embezzlement's one of the ones people walk into. As scary as it sounds, embezzlement's an easier crime to sort of accidentally happen into.
Yeah. So what types of white collar crimes do you see most often in the Boston area or in Massachusetts in general?
So yeah, I mean, everything is going to be some form of larceny. And without getting into like the real weeds legally, larceny is larceny.
Larceny is just stealing, right?
Right. I mean, it's called different things in different areas. Like in New Hampshire, where I used to practice, it's called theft by unauthorized taking. But you can also have like theft by false pretenses, or I'm not sure if that's what they called it in New Hampshire, but I know that larceny by false pretenses in Massachusetts, larceny by embezzlement. They all get kind of grouped together in the law. And, if you charge one and you prove another, there are ways the prosecution can still get you, even if it's not technically the thing they charged under, merger theory. So, yeah, I mean, it's all going to be larceny, because why else would somebody commit a financial crime if they weren't trying to get money out of it, right? And I mean, insurance fraud, what you would see and what we always did when I was a prosecutor is you're going to charge fraud, which is the lie, whatever lie you told to your insurance company, plus larceny. So 2 felonies, right? You have the fraud, which is the means by which you committed the larceny, which is why you did it. And there are, a lot of practical reasons why they get charged together. It's so that you have motive attached to the means, I guess, of the crime. Tells a fuller story, enables restitution, make people pay the money back, kind of thing. So there are reasons that these things are kind of tied together, but it's always going to have to do with, it always comes down to money, generally.
Yeah, definitely. So how has technology or remote work changed how these crimes show up in court?
Well, I mean, technology, especially, one of the things that's been challenging, and I had a case that dealt with this very directly, where we called it tongue-in-cheek the Nigerian prince scam, because you get an email from someone saying, I'm a prince and I have access to billions of dollars, but I need a little bit of money from you to get it out of escrow, and then I'll share it with you. And as funny as we all think that might be, there are more sophisticated versions of that happen many, many, many times a day. The most common form of online larceny, this is at least what I've been told, is something called a business email compromise, where somebody hacks into your email and they read your emails and your email chains with you and it gets a business email. So it's not necessarily going to be for individuals, but they're going to read about how you are expecting $100,000 from so-and-so, and you have to send it to a different person. And they are going to send an email posing as one of those intermediaries and saying, send me that money. It sounds implausible, but in the world, I guess, of business, this stuff happens at such a pace that if you get an email that says, it's me, your boss, I need you to release those funds to me, to my bank account in, Canada. And you're like, I better do it. The boss demands it. And then the money's gone. And again, the reason I dealt with a case like this, the people who did it never entered Massachusetts. They took a bunch of money from a Massachusetts nonprofit, and they never even came close to setting foot in Massachusetts. So in that sense, the technology enabled them to commit this theft, and then they laundered the money through a bunch of bank accounts. So we got them on the theft and the money laundering. So it's just strange.
Money laundering, I know that's like your pet thing, so we'll get into that later. So that's a little teaser for the people.
Sure.
And yeah, and I feel like we ought to be, when we're talking white collar crime, ought to be having a beverage. So that's.
Yeah, I got my beer here.
So I guess we haven't cheers yet, but cheers.
to white collar crime.
To white collar.
At this point, defending against it, defending against the allegations.
Yeah, definitely.
One of the features of defending against it is that I've talked about this before, but it's so complicated, right? I mean, being able to build a case like this, at least from a perspective of a lot of criminal practitioners, where, it's when I did narcotics work, it would be, this person sold drugs to a cop. I get the cop, I get the chemist, and that's basically my whole case, right? It's endlessly more complicated when you have a series of banks that have been used to try and hide money, or, insurance companies that have been ripped off. Because now you need representatives from all these entities. You need to be able to tell a compelling story. You need an investigator who can go through the records that you've acquired as an investigator, as an investigating prosecutor. So then when you're on the defense side, knowing all this, it's like you're going to have a heck of a time proving this case. You're going to need so many people. It's going to take so long, and there's so many things that can go wrong for you. And if you get the wrong prosecutor, they're going to be like, bring it on. I can't wait. And that sounds like a lot of fun for me to burn 4 weeks, bring bankers into court. But generally, this is the reason these things go unprosecuted or under-prosecuted, is it's just such a huge lift. And really, the AG's office is one of the few places that does these like fairly serious. I mean, again, some DA's offices do it, but it can be hard to muster the resources.
And I feel like it's so much different because there's so much more paperwork involved. There's so many more records. There's like, it takes a lot of attention to detail that, as criminal defense attorneys, a lot of times it just makes our eyes cross to look at this kind of stuff.
I mean, to your credit, the first case we had together was a white collar-ish case, and you went through with a fine-tooth comb. And it was really funny for me because I was filling in for another attorney, and like, here you come sauntering up and you're like, what about on page 372 of the grand jury minutes? And I was like, I don't know what you're talking about. If you want to try the case, I'll do that. But I'm not going to debate individual pieces of evidence with you. But yeah, that attention to detail is crucial. And if an attorney can't do it or won't do it, you're not getting a good defense against a white collar prosecutor.
It's not something you can pick up the night before trial and just say, here's my theory, here's what I'm going to say. It's like you gotta know this stuff backwards and forwards to be able to try one of these cases.
Agreed.
Walk us through what happens when someone is charged with a white collar crime. Is it different? I mean, because if you have a robbery, they like go catch the person they're charging, they arrest them, they bring them to court. Is it different from a white collar perspective?
Typically. So unless there is reason to believe the person is a flight risk or, which again can happen in that case where I had people from out of state, it's like, you have no connection to Massachusetts. Why would I believe that you would stay here? In that case, we also had evidence destruction concerns. There can be, so you point out that a lot of times folks are going to get arrested at the scene of a crime. If not, and if it's a violent crime, once you have your suspect, maybe there's a warrant, there's an indictment warrant. But generally, and I will say this, a lot of the times the people I prosecuted did not have extensive criminal histories. This was the first time they got caught. I wouldn't say it was the first time in most of the examples, it wasn't the first time it had happened. And we start going through the bank records and we're like, yeesh, it's been happening for a little while now. It's without a criminal history, and if they have connections to the community, you're going to get a summons. Or you're going to get something in the mail that says you've been charged with this litany of felonies, and you're like, oh boy, and like you need to come to court and be arraigned. And so that's the way people find out.
So a lot of times there's no district court, you're
going to get directly indicted into superior court. Yeah, and that you asked how it starts for a person who's been charged. What they don't know is that it actually starts a lot of times much earlier. So there's going to be a referral to an insurance company or a bank, or somebody is going to say, hey, I think there's a crime going on here. And if it passes muster and it gets through enough investigators, it may go to the AG's office, at which point we're going to do a lengthy grand jury investigation. And without going into the weeds about what grand jury investigations are, it's going to be the kind of thing where a group of people who are seated a couple times a week for several months, and they hear cases, and all they are charged with doing is determining whether there's probable cause to indict. And we use the grand jury to gather investigative materials so for example, a lot of people may not know this, because your bank is a third party, if we suspect that and I keep saying we, but if the government suspects that you're involved in a crime in some way, they can just say to the bank, the grand jury wants these records. And the banks will typically cough them right up. So this is all happening years before a person finds out. Grand jury investigations are typically very secretive for a bunch of reasons. You don't want to embarrass people if you don't determine that they should be charged with a crime, or if the grand jury doesn't determine they want to be charged with that they should be charged with a crime. You also don't want to risk destruction of evidence. So a person may find out when they get that summons, but likely the thing has been in process for a while. White-collar cases are notoriously paper-heavy.
Today's episode is brought to you by the law office of Matthew W. Peterson. If you're facing legal trouble in Massachusetts, whether it's an OUI, a firearm charge, or even just a clerk magistrate hearing, the stakes couldn't be higher. This isn't the time to go at it alone. You need more than just a lawyer. You need a legal team that knows how to fight and knows how to win. That's why people across Massachusetts turn to the law office of Matthew W. Peterson. With years of experience in criminal defense, family law, and immigration, we've got the track record and the passion to defend your rights. We've successfully represented clients in some of the toughest situations out there, from first-time offenses to serious felony charges. We've helped people protect their record, their families, and their freedom. So don't wait until it's too late. Visit mwpetersonlaw.com to schedule your consultation or call 617-295-7500. That's mwpetersonlaw.com and 617-295-7500. Because when your future's on the line, you deserve a legal team that's all in. Stay informed, stay legal. Now, back to the show. So you're telling me you may be under investigation for white-collar crime and have no idea?
I mean, we could be under investigation right now, but probably not. But it's anything is possible. Yeah, no. Typically, it goes on without people's knowledge. Yeah, most of the time, I would say. And then, because they're so paper heavy, you ask what happens when you get summons. You come into for your arraignment. At least if it's the AG's office, or if at least with my people who I trained and worked with, or who trained me, you're going to come in and you're going to get, like, in some cases, this is not a joke, a hard drive of paper.
Oh yeah.
And it's like this is 2 years worth of investigative material. And your attorney, if you get the wrong defense attorney, they're going to look at it, they're going to be like, how fast can we plead this case out? Because if I have to look at this, I'm going to quit.
I think I'm looking right now at 2 hard drives that I gave over for cases over the years, and like I still have that you're in for trouble in a case when the DA says, oh, by the way, bring a couple of terabyte hard drive over to me and I'll give you the discovery.
Right. I mean, and the reason they build cases this way is because you can, right? Like, it's hard to argue with bank records. Bank records are not usually full of, like, manipulating lies, like, and it's easier than witness testimony sometimes. But yeah, so that's what happens early on. And then you're really in the formal system. But the courts let's handle these cases differently.
I mean, I know I've handled a couple where my client, the way that I get involved is my client says, hey, I just got a call from a postal inspector or a state police officer or something like that who says they want to see me for an interview. So a lot of times when they get called in for the interview, like, what stage is that in?
So that's a good question. Target interviews are a curious thing, and it depends on who you ask.
Target interviews you mean like an interview of the person who may be charged, right?
Right. And so what you have to keep in mind is that, where we've all watched TV, police serials, if we have, if it's why you became a lawyer or a police officer, you watch Law and Order and the cops just run around talking to people, and maybe they bump into the actual person who's guilty very early on or something like that. In a white collar case, if you have your arms around it, you typically are not interviewing the target until you have. Again, there's nothing that stops you from doing it at any time, but generally accepted practice is if you do it at all, you wait until the very, very end. And when I say very end, it could be, and again, I had these conversations when I was an assistant attorney general. The conversation is this case going nowhere? Do we not have adequate evidence for one of the things? Maybe we should just interview the person we think who did it and see if they admit it. We throw a bunch of the documents at them and see if they're like, yeah, you got me. Or we have plenty. We don't really need more evidence. But it would save us a lot of time if they confess. Do you want to just bring them in and see if show them all the evidence and see if they'll confess, because that shortens, the walk we have to do when we put this into litigation. From a defense perspective, you really don't, it's a risk to take that interview. It's insane to take that interview without an attorney.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask you. Like if somebody calls you up and says, "Hey, I just got a call from whoever and they want me to come in for an interview. They're accusing me of fraud or whatever." What's your advice to them?
You need a lawyer. It's crazy to go in, because even if what you have to keep in mind is that these folks, you have no idea what they have. You have no idea what they suspect. They may have years of bank records that make it look very, very likely you committed a crime, even if you didn't. And you think, oh, if I go in there, I could just explain to them,
Mm-hmm.
What you don't know is that, it could be that what you're admitting to is a strict liability offense, and now you've walked yourself into a conviction. I will say this. If I hear that question, I'm iffy as to whether or not I would agree to go in with another person. It's just super rare that you want to let a person talk to an investigator unless, for example, if they have evidence that would clear whatever the allegation is, you would want a lawyer to tell you. You want an experienced lawyer who knows how these cases work to be like, oh yeah, this is a death blow to their case. And if you give it to them, they might just go away, right? Then you don't have to deal with the arraignment and everything else. You don't have to deal with the charge. That's going to be surpassingly rare, but you essentially need someone who knows what they're looking at to tell you. Because I couldn't tell you the number of times I've had people say, what about blank? What about blank? And it's like, that will not help you. Like, I understand it's a creative answer. It's not going to help you here. Like, they're going to have you on X, Y, and Z charges. But bottom line is, going in without an attorney, I wouldn't do one of these meetings. If it was me, if I got a call about something like this, I wouldn't go in without a lawyer.
So let me ask you this, like, you've represented a couple of people in these situations so far working with me. And is it possible that an attorney can even get some information from the prosecutor, from the police, to even if you don't go in for an interview, to be able to know what you're looking at?
Absolutely. And I've had that exact case, where someone gets a call who want to interview you, and they say, I want to talk to a lawyer. They call us. I get the person's contact information at whatever investigative agency, and I call them. And oddly enough, the case that I'm thinking of, like, I did so many of these as a prosecutor that, like, I could build this case off the top of my head. Like, I know if they have it, I know the evidence they have. I know what they're going to need to prove which elements. So I got on the phone with the assistant U.S. attorney in charge of the case, and he says, I have all of it. And I was like, all right, well, call me when you're ready and we'll talk, because, like, I now know with the things he's saying that there are going to be only one or two ways we're going to be able to get out of this. With the client's going to be able to get out of it. And the sad thing is, the clients told me, I said this a couple minutes ago, but the client said things like, what about X, Y, and Z? What about all these different, and I said, that doesn't matter. Like, the stuff you signed that you don't remember said that none of that happened. And now you're telling me it did happen. And so what they're going to do is they're going to hook you on perjury if you try to stick to that story. Like, and it's awful, because people they're not doing this stuff like sitting there like, I'm going to get away with all these crimes. They aren't reading these, endlessly long documents they're being given to sign under penalty of perjury.
Yeah. That's wild. It's something that an endlessly long document. All of us sign those things every day. I think that I agree to terms and conditions like 16 times a day.
Right. And if you were getting government benefits to, like, help you pay your mortgage or something, like, you're going to sign the dotted line because you don't want to lose your benefits.
Yeah.
And if at the end of the day, it's like, ooh, line number 5 had an inconsistency. It's like, all right, well, I can explain that. Don't. Because if you do, they may charge you with perjury. You may walk into a more serious charge. There's really just no way to adequately defend yourself against this kind of thing unless you have an attorney who has either defended it or prosecuted it, I would say, is the bottom line.
So if a person gets one of these calls, realistically, an attorney could not only figure out what is going on and help you lay the groundwork for a defense or figure out whether you should talk to them, but it's just necessary to talk to an attorney. right?
Yeah, I mean, I'll say this because I had these conversations as a prosecutor. This person I will walk them in. I will, if you want to, I will walk them into court, so you don't have to arrest them.
Oh,
Have that. I agreed to that as a prosecutor a number of times. And say like, all right, I won't have the cops knock on this person's door at 5 p.m. Like I will call you, and you will bring them in. And like it matters if the attorney is someone who is trustworthy. Like I wouldn't agree to that to someone I'd never met or who I didn't think I could trust. But like, yeah, I agree to that all the time with people who I knew were straight shooters and who I could work with. They are your key into the system, which is it's a maze, and you need someone who can walk you through it.
So yeah, I mean, that what you're saying there is that even in a situation where you don't go in and talk and you don't provide evidence prior to the charges, an attorney could help you negotiate a surrender with
of course,
with the prosecutor, so that you don't get arrested in the middle of the night or get arrested and drug without knowing when it's coming.
No, for sure. I mean, to your point, even if you're not able to facilitate testimony or an interview, you still want the lawyer there to it's crazy as this sounds, you don't even want to be having phone calls, right? Because it's going to get recorded. It's going to get memorialized. It's going to get written down. There is no off the record here, right? So
phone calls with the prosecutor or with the police, is that what you mean?
Yeah, you can't talk to, and I mean, look, when I was a prosecutor, I knew people might call and give me like information I want to use against them. And so I wouldn't take the call unless I had an investigator with me who could testify. Like there is no off the record. The only thing that is off record is when your attorney's talking to them because they're not a witness, right? So like your attorney can have these conversations, but if you try to represent yourself, it's just an unfortunate fact of the legal system. Like the lawyer can talk to them, and anything you say can and will be used against you.
Or like I have on my in the office. You never see a fish on the wall with its mouth shut.
Right?
Right. I mean, that's the prosecutor. I mean, prosecutors love that when people go in without lawyers and talk to them, and they know a lot more than you do, and they know a lot more than you think they know, and you can't really lie to them or trick them.
And I will say this, not giving away the keys to the kingdom here, but like I knew how to structure interviews where and I would sometimes say this to people so it didn't seem like I was being a manipulative piece of work, but like
piece of work.
Yeah, I would try not to curse. I don't know if we're allowed to curse on this podcast.
I don't know either. I never know the rules with that. Like, I mean, I guess we haven't established rules.
What I would say is something like, I'm going to ask you questions that I don't know the answer to. I'm going to ask you questions I maybe know the answer to. And I'm going to ask you questions I definitely know the answer to. And I'm not going to tell you which are which, right? So I've got whatever evidence I have. And if I ask you a question I know the answer to and you lie to me, I'm going to know that you're lying to me.
But Jazz said we can curse, by the way.
Oh, great. All right, cool.
So what were you, piece of work? What was that? Piece of what?
I guess a piece of shit. I don't know. It would probably have been the thing, You're a real piece of work. Sounds much more professional and old-timey. But there's an art to it, and I never got a lot of formalized training, and so there are a lot of people who are way better at it than me. But I got to be like decent enough at conducting these kinds of interviews, mostly because of the narcotics stuff that I did in New Hampshire, was that I would do what we called proffers, where someone would come in and agree to tell me all the information and agree. They basically come in as a cooperating witness.
Yeah.
And, if they lie, now their testimony is useless, right? But I would ask these disconfirming or confirming questions to get a sense for who I'm talking to. I'm not going to only ask you the questions I don't know the answer to. I'm going to ask you the questions I do know and see if you're lying to me. And you have no idea what they have access to, right? So you don't know what you're giving them versus what they're taking away from you. So these things are very risky, and that's, again, you need to have someone who knows what they're getting into.
Yeah, I mean, as a defense attorney, I want to be in control of the situation usually. And if my client's talking and, they ask them a question that I don't know the answer to and I don't know what my client's going to say, I feel completely out of control, and I don't want to be in that situation.
That's exactly right.
So we talked to, basically, if you get one of these calls from somebody, you don't want to go in for an interview, especially not without an attorney. You want an attorney to be able to know what their evidence may be. You want an attorney to potentially negotiate a surrender. You want an attorney to be able to translate the evidence that you have into something the prosecutor that might be useful for you. But let's talk now about what happens after that. So after you're indicted, you're brought into court. I mean, what should people be looking for in an attorney, or how can an attorney help them?
Sure. I mean, if your attorney gets a hard drive full of information and blanches because they can't believe they've never seen a police report longer than 8 pages, and they now have to go through like 10,000 pages. I mean, it sounds like a joke, but genuinely one of the things I learned how to do when I was investigating these cases is you learn where to look, right? I mean, if I have to go through 10,000 pages of bank documents one at a time, like, it will hamper the defense. But if I know where to look, I can make more efficient use of our time. I can figure out where the holes in the case are. I'm not going to get lost in the sauce in terms of like all the, 18 bank accounts that we have to go through. Organizing these things. Like as an investigator, you have to organize things to data to know what it tells you. And then as a defense attorney, you kind of need to do the same thing and look for the weaknesses. So in looking for an attorney, you need someone who I think who can deal with these kinds of complex cases. Someone who has confidence in their ability to go through it and meticulously sort of understand, like, look, there's a lot of bad evidence here, but there are a couple of serious weak spots, and we would know how to exploit them.
Yeah. And
so you asked what to look for in an attorney. What else? Are we asking what to look for in a case too, or?
Well, yeah. I mean, whatever.
Okay, so I'll tell you. In a case like this, you should be getting grand jury minutes. If it's with the DA's office, you may not get them straight out of the gate. If it was with any of the people I worked with or trained at the AG's office, typically you're getting the grand jury minutes at arraignment, and you're going to get it with a bunch of other discovery. Like, our discovery practice was crazy because prosecutors, if they're doing their jobs correctly, are very afraid of not giving you all the material they have. It's a serious violation. So, we were super careful to try and make sure we turned everything over in a way that was as transparent as possible. But it is in some ways still a data dump. And that's why the grand jury minutes help, because the grand jury minutes is a transcript of everything that the government put in front of the grand jury to get you indicted. So it's their roadmap to the case. Now, there are different theories among prosecutors as to whether you should put in your whole case at the grand jury or whether you just put in enough to get probable cause, which is a low bar. It doesn't really matter, because what they give you will tell you where they think the charges are. And so you need someone who can read the grand jury minutes, but I mean, and I say that like, obviously, attorneys, hopefully your attorney can read. But if they read through it and it's like, it's hard to describe. I think, if you've never dealt with these kinds of cases, it can be overwhelming, right? Because there's a lot of documentation. You're hearing from a lot of different people about a lot of different bank accounts, transactions. Fraud itself is generally kind of abstract, right? Because it involves a lie, being told to secure something. Even to take the simplest example, if I smash my car pulling into my driveway, and I call my insurance company and say I got rear-ended, and then in a hit and run, that's insurance fraud, right? Like, I'm trying to get my car fixed by my insurance company by telling them somebody else hit my car. And then there's going to be a larceny amount attached to that. But like there's still a layer of abstraction to how that all works. So you need a lawyer who can deal with it. That's really it.
And I guess you need a lawyer who knows what they're looking for. So, I mean, any lawyer can sit there I guess not any lawyer, but a lot of lawyers can dedicate the time to one of these cases and read through tens of thousands of pages. But I guess it's that one needle in the haystack that you really need to find and focus in on that's going to be the battleground of the case.
Right. And it's not going to occur to someone. You could have a very meticulous and detail-oriented attorney who's going to go through all the discovery. I mean, do you want them learning on the job? Mm-hmm. I wouldn't, right? I'd want somebody who's like, I'm going to go to the elements of the offense, where they exist in discovery, and if they're not there, I'm going to have the thing dismissed, right? But I need someone who knows where to look and how. Yeah.
You don't want, we're all practicing law, but you don't want them learning the law and practicing on your case where your life is at stake.
And, there is, I will say this from having worked in narcotics, right? There are like only so many permutations of that crime, right? Like
I feel like you've told me about a bunch of them, but anyway, that's not.
There are a lot. Yeah, there's certainly a lot of ways to get into trouble, right? But like the number of ways you can get into it in a white collar sense was really one of the more interesting parts of the job. Frankly, was how the diversity of, I mean, I don't know the extent to which we could talk about the case that you and I worked on together, but it involved pandemic.
I think the only thing we can talk about is that I won, but.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the guilty conviction, sure. But
yeah, I mean, I think that I won, you lost. I mean,
yeah, I mean, if we really like boiled it down to its constituent parts, the person did $100,000 of pandemic fraud, and you got him to serve like 3 weeks in jail.
I mean, concurrent with other times, so yeah.
He barely served time at all, frankly. But yeah, yeah.
So now, and the moment everyone's been waiting for, I mean, I'm sure that we're going to have to put a bookmark here for this so that people can skip the rest of the stuff and get to the real meat of the topic, money laundering.
Money laundering.
So I think, isn't it Breaking Bad that they talk about, I've got a bunch of money, but I can't spend it? And none of it's spent.
It's
right?
Certainly going to be, it's probably Breaking Bad, Ozark.
Ozark, yeah, that's the one. Ozark. That's a better example, Jazz. Thank you.
I mean, Ozark is essentially a show about money laundering, right? That's what his whole thing was. I still think Office Space is the funniest one, where they corner a guy trying to sell them a magazine at their door, like door-to-door salesman, and they're like, "Do you know what money laundering is?" I look it up in like the Encyclopedia Britannica, and I can't figure it out or something. I don't know.
So, and we talked about it. It's basically you're getting dirty money, making it clean, just like your laundry, right?
Right, but why do you need to clean your money? What's wrong with dirty money? If you were under investigation for a crime and you had all this, like, and this is easily the simplest way I can describe it. I talked, if you had built someone out of money by pretending you were in business with them, and it went into your personal bank account, and then you spent it, you would be very easy to catch. So what people do instinctively is you try to distance themselves from the money, and that's concealment money laundering. So it involves something called layering. Oftentimes, layering is where you move it through various bank accounts to try and disguise its origin. And believe it or not, case law gets super specific about like what layering looks like. It's going to involve the amount that's being moved, the speed with which it's being moved, where it's being moved to, like third parties, all kinds of stuff, because it's happened and the courts have seen it. Not the state courts generally, the federal courts. And then there's a whole lot that can be said about the relationship between federal case law and Massachusetts money laundering, which we don't have to go into on this podcast. But suffice it to say, there's a lot out there.
So yeah, money laundering, you're trying to get this dirty money, this money that you got from an illegal method, and make it clean money that you can spend in society. As a former prosecutor on this, somebody who's, I think probably one of the foremost experts in Massachusetts money laundering law.
I don't know. I sure like to think so, but who the heck knows, Matthew? It is something that not a lot of people specialize in. And so having a sort of experience in it, I think, is something that I can, like, I indicted a lot of people for it. I've done a lot of research on it. I've lectured on it. Like,
So if somebody is accused of money laundering in Massachusetts, I mean, what do you bring to the table? Like, what is it that you can spot in their cases that maybe your average run-of-the-mill criminal defense attorney couldn't?
I guess you would start with the substance of the charge, right? So what did you do that they think is money laundering? And do we have a reasonable excuse for it, right? Like if the money moved around a lot, but there's a good reason why it moved around a lot, then it undermines the intent element that you were moving the money to hide it. There are other types of money laundering that we don't really need to get into, but like they get more complex. If you're using illegal money to run a business that's also illegal, you have a different problem there. If you are only doing transactions at $9,999 to avoid triggering a $10,000 reporting requirement by financial institutions, you're involved in something called structuring. So like there are different ways to do it, but I would say what someone with experience, I would say hopefully somebody like myself, can bring to a defense of something like this is, one, are they right on the substance? Because if it's not a good fit, and like a great example is there was the landmark case in Massachusetts, Commonwealth v. Braun, Braune, and Braun involves an allegation of concealment money laundering. And in that case, I mean, I don't want to get into that case, but like the Supreme Judicial Court of Massachusetts used it as a case of first impression, so to speak, where they could say, you're allowed to bring in federal case law to kind of help teach us how this should work. And then they borrowed from federal case law and used it to say, listen, if concealment is not the motivating purpose of the financial transaction, then it's not concealment money laundering. And so this sort of hybridizes my approach, right? If in substance what you did is not money laundering, then we have defenses, justifications. If it's not a legal fit, we have a legal argument. And if it's somewhere between, we can make the argument that one, the conduct charged is not money laundering, but two, the way it's charged isn't an adequate fit. So I know it sounds complicated. It's just frankly because it is. And part of the problem here is there's so little case law in Massachusetts that examines money laundering, that, you know, we are in a place where there's a lot of novel arguments to be made. You know, you're not going to be in a situation where the court has heard this all before and they know how to handle it. You know, you may be in front of a judge who's heard of money laundering the same way you've heard of it in Ozark, but they've never seen it in court. And now you get a lawyer in there who's like, Judge, here are all the cases that apply to this, and this is just a bad charge here. Like, then it goes away.
Basically, you don't want to hire a lawyer who learned about money laundering from watching your miniseries or reading your blog. You want to hire the real thing.
Yeah, I would say that's probably true. I mean, you know, as good as the blog and the miniseries may be, you need to live in the space, right? I mean, and having investigated it, it helps to know how the government's looking at it, because mistakes can be made. And if mistakes are made and you shouldn't be charged with this thing, you want somebody who can get it tossed out. You know, but
yeah,
you need someone who knows how the thing is built in order to tear it apart.
Exactly. Yeah. Know your enemy, or whatever
Sun Tzu said. I can't remember.
So yeah, Chris, this has been an awesome deep dive into white collar crime. Before we wrap, what's one thing you wish more people knew about white collar criminal defense in Massachusetts?
Don't go it alone. You know, a lot of times what happens with white collar crime is people, because it's not a smash and grab, because it's not, you know, I didn't knock over a package store. Like, what? This is just a misunderstanding. We can clear this all up. Fight that instinct. That's not, the people who are charging you with this don't think it's a misunderstanding. They think they know exactly what happened. And your reasonable explanation may be exactly what they're looking for to charge you with something else. So don't go in without adequate representation. And adequate representation means someone who knows what this is. You can't take a fly-by-night attorney who goes to court and just churns out, you know, district court cases. You need somebody who has experience. I mean, that's what gives you the best fighting chance anyway. So that's my advice. Don't go it alone.
It's a specialized area. It's a serious area, and you need a serious and specialized attorney for it.
Seems fair.
So for anyone listening, whether you're in Boston, the North Shore, or anywhere else in the Commonwealth, if you're facing white collar charges, we're here to help. Stay tuned. We got a lot more coming on Boston Barristers. Thanks, Chris.
Thank you, Matthew.